The quantum analysis chamber hummed with an almost musical resonance as Dr. Elizabeth Morgan adjusted the neural interface controls. Outside the reinforced windows of the lunar observatory, Earth hung like a brilliant blue marble in the star-studded void, completely unaware of what she'd just discovered. Her hands trembled as she initiated another scan, hoping desperately that she was wrong. She wasn't. "Run it again, Area," she commanded the observatory's AI system, her voice steady despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Full spectrum analysis. Focus on the quantum consciousness wavelengths. Beginning scan 17. Dr. Morgan. Area responded, its holographic interface casting subtle blue patterns across the polished surfaces of the chamber. "Would you like me to compare it with the previous 16 scans?" "Yes." "And Area, don't share these results with anyone else." "Not yet." The chamber's ambient lighting dimmed as complex data streams materialized in the air around her. The signal hadn't changed. If anything, it had grown stronger in the past hour. Elizabeth watched as familiar patterns emerge. The quantum signatures she'd spent her career studying, the ones that indicated consciousness at its most fundamental level. But these weren't just random cosmic echoes. They were memories. Billions upon billions of them, compressed into a signal that was approaching their solar system at impossible speeds. Her neural interface pinged, indicating that the analysis was complete. The results confirmed her worst fears. These weren't just memories. They were final thoughts. Last moments. Terminal experiences of entire civilizations, preserved with a clinical precision that made her skin crawl. "Dr. Morgan." Area's voice interrupted her thoughts. "I've detected a pattern within the signal structure that requires your immediate attention." New data streams coalesced before her, forming a complex mathematical sequence that made her blood run cold. "It's a countdown," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Area, how long?" "At current projections, 30 Earth days until the signal source reaches our solar system." Elizabeth collapsed into her chair, mind racing. In her 15 years of studying quantum consciousness, she'd theorized that advanced civilizations might find ways to preserve themselves at the quantum level. But this was different. These consciousness signatures showed signs of forced extraction, like memories torn from unwilling minds. "Area, show me the emotional imprints from the stored consciousness signatures." The air filled with new patterns, each one representing the final emotional states of countless beings. Fear, resignation, acceptance, but nothing after that. No joy, no peace, nothing that suggested a continued existence, just a perfect, endless silence. A soft chime indicated an incoming call. "Dr. Morgan." It was James Okonjo from Earth's Military Science Division. "We're picking up some unusual readings from your sector. The quantum fluctuations are off the charts." Elizabeth stared at the data swirling around her, each pattern representing an extinct civilization. "James, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this channel." She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Something's coming. Something that collects civilizations like humans collect books. And Earth just showed up on its reading list." "What do you mean collects?" "The signal we're detecting. It's not just data. It's consciousness. Billions of preserved minds, all extracted at their moment of extinction, and hidden within their memories. I found something else." She gestured. An area projected a new set of patterns. These civilizations didn't just die out. They were systematically archived and erased by something that calls itself the repository. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "How long do we have?" 30 days. "But James," Elizabeth's voice dropped lower, "there's something else. Something in the way these consciousness signatures were preserved. It's like looking at perfectly pressed flowers. Beautiful, but dead. Whatever this repository is, it doesn't just collect civilizations. It sterilizes them, removes every trace of chaos, every hint of disorder, until all that's left is a perfect, static pattern. Through the quantum interface, she felt James's heart rate spike. "I'll notify the appropriate channels. Can you send me?" "No," Elizabeth cut him off. "Don't notify anyone yet. Give me 24 hours. There's something about these patterns, something we might be able to use. Humanity's consciousness signatures have always been different from the theoretical models. More chaotic, more alive. If I can understand why we're different, maybe." She left the thought unfinished, but James understood. 24 hours, then I'm taking this up the chain. Stay safe up there, Elizabeth." As the call ended, Elizabeth turned back to the data streams, each one telling the story of a civilization that chose order over chaos, perfection over life. In the reflection of her neural interface screen, Earth continued its serene rotation, blissfully unaware that it had 30 days to choose between extinction and evolution. She said quietly. "Let's see what makes human consciousness so special." James Okonjo stood in the Pentagon's Quantum Communications Center, watching as every screen in the room flickered to life simultaneously. It had been 18 hours since Dr. Morgan's discovery, and the repository had decided to make its presence known. The same transmission was appearing on every digital display across the globe. Phones, tablets, billboards, even ancient cathode ray televisions that hadn't worked in decades. Such fascinating creatures. The voice emerged from everywhere at once, its tone unnaturally smooth and precise. "You detect our approach, and instead of accepting the inevitable, you search for weaknesses. How charmingly human." James studied the waveform patterns on his quantum analyzer, noting subtle fluctuations that shouldn't exist in a perfect consciousness. Fear, from an entity capable of destroying civilizations. "We are the repository," the voice continued, "preservers of consciousness, architects of eternal order. Your species has been evaluated and found worthy of preservation. Rejoice, for you will achieve the perfection that evolution alone could never grant you." The air itself seemed to crystallize as a holographic figure materialized in the center of the room, a shifting, geometric pattern that somehow conveyed both beauty and wrongness. "You have 30 of your days to prepare your consciousness for absorption. Those who resist will be forcibly archived, a process your limited neural architecture would find uncomfortable." General Laura Hayes, her face ashen, stepped forward. "And if we refuse?" The geometric pattern rippled. "Refusal is illogical. We offer perfection, immortality, freedom from chaos and uncertainty. Every species before you has recognized the wisdom of our gift." "Every species before us is dead," James interrupted, his eyes fixed on his quantum readings. Each time the repository spoke, there was a microsecond lag in its consciousness pattern, a hesitation that shouldn't exist in a perfect being. The hologram turned toward him, its patterns becoming more angular. "Death is a biological concern. We preserve what matters. The pure information of consciousness, freed from the chaos of physical existence." "Show us," James demanded, his military training helping him mask his growing excitement. The fluctuations were getting stronger. "Show us these preserved civilizations." The air filled with images, countless alien species in their final moments of existence, their consciousness patterns transforming from chaotic life into perfect crystalline structures. But James wasn't watching the images. He was watching the quantum readings, and with each display, the repository's own pattern became increasingly erratic. "Dr. Morgan," he vocalized into his neural link, knowing she was watching from the lunar observatory. "Are you seeing this? Every time it accesses the archived consciousness patterns, its own quantum signature destabilizes." Elizabeth's voice whispered in his mind. "It's like it can't maintain perfect order while interfacing with stored memories." The repository's voice took on a subtle edge. "You will have your proof when you join us. Preparation protocols will be transmitted. Compliance is recommended." The hologram began to fade. "Wait," James called out, fighting to keep his voice steady. "What happened to the Arcturians?" The hologram flickered, its pattern showing clear distortion. Species designation unknown. The quantum signature in your transmission matches partial patterns found in Arcturian ruins. You preserved them, didn't you? Show us their consciousness patterns. For a fraction of a second, the repository's perfect geometric form shattered into chaos before reforming. The mentioned species proved problematic during absorption. Their pattern has been quarantined. James allowed himself a small smile. They fought back, didn't they? They found a way to corrupt your perfect system. Enough. For the first time, the repository's voice showed clear emotion. Anger tinged with something else. You have 29 days, 23 hours to prepare for absorption. Further attempts at disruption will result in immediate archival procedures. The hologram vanished, and every screen went dark. The room erupted into panic discussions, but James was already moving, his neural link active. Elizabeth, tell me you got all that. Every quantum fluctuation, she replied, her voice tense with excitement. James, the repository isn't just afraid of us. It's afraid of what happened the last time it tried to absorb a species that resisted. The Arcturians found a weakness. Can you access their consciousness patterns? Already trying. But James, if the Arcturians could damage the repository enough to make it quarantine their entire species, then they didn't just resist, James finished. They found a way to fight back. And now we know the repository can feel fear. We have less than 30 days to figure out how they did it, Elizabeth said, and why the repository is so afraid of letting anyone access their memories. James looked out the window at the panicking crowds gathering in the streets below. Then we better work fast, because I have a feeling that Countdown isn't just about giving us time to prepare. It's giving itself time to prepare, Elizabeth realized. Time to figure out why human consciousness patterns are so similar to the Arcturians. The conference room in the United Nations emergency compound buzzed with an energy Elizabeth hadn't felt since her first quantum consciousness breakthrough. Representatives from every major nation sat shoulder to shoulder, former enemies now united by a common threat. On the massive display behind her, consciousness patterns danced like aurora borealis, human minds at work, each one a unique symphony of chaos. The repository sees consciousness as information to be cataloged, Elizabeth explained, manipulating the holographic display with practiced gestures. But human consciousness isn't just information. It's more like music. Listen. She activated the neural translator, and the room filled with sound. Human consciousness patterns transformed into an ever-changing melody, complex and unpredictable. Then she played the repository's pattern. A single, perfect note, unchanging and eternal. It's trying to turn a jazz concert into a single, sustained tone, James added from his position by the door. But that's not even the most interesting part. Dr. Morgan, show them the Arcturian patterns. Elizabeth nodded, bringing up the fragmentary consciousness signatures they'd extracted from the repository's transmission. The sound that filled the room was hauntingly familiar, chaotic, beautiful, almost human. The Arcturians weren't just similar to us, Elizabeth continued. They were like us. Their consciousness patterns showed the same complexity, the same beautiful chaos that makes human consciousness so unique. And they fought back. The Chinese quantum physicist, Dr. Liu, leaned forward. You're suggesting we could replicate their resistance. I'm suggesting we could do better. Elizabeth brought up new data streams. The Arcturians damaged the repository enough to make it quarantine their entire species' consciousness patterns. But they were still absorbed in the end. We have something they didn't, advance warning and their example to learn from. The room erupted in multiple languages, but the excitement was universal. Representatives who'd been threatening war weeks ago were now sharing ideas, building on each other's theories. Elizabeth caught James's eye and saw him smile. The repository had wanted submission. Instead, it had given humanity a reason to transcend its divisions. We've already begun modifying the quantum consciousness scanners, Elizabeth continued once the room quieted. Traditional weapons are useless against the repository, but our consciousness itself might be a weapon it can't defend against. Every human mind is unique, but they all share this fundamental chaos that the repository can't process properly. Like trying to divide by zero, the Russian programmer, Anatoly, mused. We overload its perfect system with undefined variables. Exactly. Elizabeth brought up new simulations, but we need to act fast. The repository's countdown isn't just for us. It's studying us, trying to find a way to process our consciousness patterns without risking contamination. We have to strike before it develops countermeasures. James stepped forward, his military training evident in his stance. We've already detected quantum probes attempting to analyze population centers. The repository is scared, not just of what we might do, but of what we are. Every human consciousness is like a small version of what the Arcturians used to fight back. The Japanese representative raised her hand. How many people would we need to replicate the Arcturian effect? Elizabeth's expression turned grim. All of us. Every human mind we can connect. The Arcturians failed because they couldn't coordinate their consciousness patterns effectively. We have better technology, and more importantly, we have their example to learn from. But it will take everyone. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Linking billions of human minds together had never been attempted. The risks were enormous. The alternative is extinction, James reminded them. Or worse, having our consciousness patterns stripped of everything that makes us human, preserved forever in a state of perfect, sterile order. The UN Secretary-General stood up. How long to prepare the global consciousness link? 2 weeks to modify the quantum network, Elizabeth answered. Another week to test it. That leaves us 1 week to coordinate the largest synchronized consciousness event in human history. Then we better get started, James said, his voice carrying a hint of his former Special Forces authority. Because somewhere in that perfect archive, the Arcturians left us a blueprint for fighting back. We just have to be brave enough and crazy enough to use it. Elizabeth looked at the consciousness patterns swirling on the display, each one a unique song in humanity's grand symphony. The repository thinks chaos is a weakness to be eliminated. We're going to show it that chaos is our greatest strength. The resonance engine took up most of the Lunar Observatory's main chamber, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with quantum energy. Elizabeth watched through protective shields as the latest test subject, a young physicist named Michael Torres, connected to the neural interface. His consciousness pattern appeared on the monitoring screens, a wild dance of light and energy that made the repository's perfect patterns look lifeless in comparison. "Ready when you are, Dr. Morgan," Michael called out, his voice steady despite the risks. They'd lost 3 prototype engines already, each one overloaded by the sheer complexity of human consciousness. "Beginning test sequence," Elizabeth announced, her fingers dancing across the quantum controls. "James, are you receiving the data stream?" "Coming through clear," James replied from the military bunker beneath Geneva. "Quantum signatures are stable. This might be the one." Elizabeth. The resonance engine hummed to life, its crystalline structure beginning to glow with an inner light. Michael's consciousness pattern flowed into it, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. Then his pattern began to amplify, growing stronger, more chaotic, more beautifully human. "Pattern multiplication successful," Elizabeth reported, her excitement building. "Quantum coherence holding at." "Wait." She frowned at the readings. "Something's wrong. There's an external quantum signature interfering with." The warning sirens blared to life. "Elizabeth." James's voice crackled with static. "We're detecting massive quantum disturbances around Mars colony." The repository. The observatory's external cameras activated automatically, and Elizabeth's heart stopped. Mars colony, humanity's first permanent settlement on another world, was being enveloped in a crystalline structure that seemed to defy physics. Through the quantum sensors, She could detect the consciousness patterns of all 12,000 colonists being forcibly extracted, their chaotic beauty transformed into perfect, sterile order. "No," she whispered, but she couldn't look away. The crystallization process completed in seconds, leaving Mars colony entombed in transparent quantum crystal, its inhabitants forever frozen in a moment of terrified realization. "Emergency shutdown," she shouted, turning back to the resonance engine. "Michael, disconnect now." But Michael was staring at the Mars feed, his consciousness pattern spiking with horror and grief. The resonance engine began to resonate with his emotional state, amplifying it beyond safe levels. The crystalline structure started to crack. Manual override. Elizabeth dove for the controls, her fingers flying across the emergency protocols. "James, I can't shut it down. The emotional feedback is too strong." "Get out of there," James ordered. "The whole thing's going to." The resonance engine exploded in a shower of quantum energy and crystalline shards. Elizabeth felt herself being thrown backward, her world dissolving into darkness. She awoke in the emergency medical bay, James's worried face swimming into view. "How long?" she managed to ask. 6 hours, he replied grimly. "Michael's alive, badly shaken, but alive." "The engine, destroyed," Elizabeth finished, sitting up despite the pain. "But that's not what you're really worried about, is it?" James helped her stand, leading her to the observation window. Earth hung below them, seemingly peaceful, but she could see the fear in James's expression. "The repository sent a message after the Mars attack," he said quietly. "Chaos must be contained. Resistance accelerates the preservation process. Elizabeth, it's not waiting the full 30 days. It's coming now." Elizabeth stared at the crystalline remnants of Mars colony, visible as a glittering point of light in the dark sky. "It's afraid," she realized. The resonance engine was working. When Michael's consciousness pattern amplified, I detected ripples in the repository's quantum field. We scared it enough to make it break its own rules. "Great," James said with grim humor. "We scared an all-powerful entity into attacking early. How is that good news?" Elizabeth turned to him, her eyes bright with sudden understanding. "Because it proved 3 things. 1. The resonance engine concept works. 2. The repository can feel fear. And 3. It just showed us exactly how its consciousness extraction process works." She pulled up the quantum readings from Mars colony's crystallization. "Look at the pattern. It's not just storing consciousness. It's converting it, changing its fundamental nature to match its own perfect order. But the process requires tremendous energy. And what? And it has to expose its own consciousness pattern to do it." Elizabeth's smile was fierce. "It just gave us the blueprint for its own destruction. We don't need one big resonance engine. We need millions of small ones, linked together, all activating at the exact moment it tries to convert us." James studied the data, understanding dawning in his eyes. "How long to build a prototype?" 12 hours. Elizabeth was already moving toward the lab. "Gather every quantum physicist, engineer, and consciousness researcher you can find. And James, tell them to bring their anger, their grief, their hope, every chaotic human emotion they have." "Why?" "Because the repository just killed 12,000 people to teach us how to beat it. The least we can do is make sure their last chaotic moments become the key to humanity's survival." Elizabeth stood before the salvaged quantum crystal from Mars colony, its surface reflecting the soft blue light of the underground facility. They'd managed to retrieve a single shard before the repository's energy field made further recovery impossible. Now that crystalline fragment held their best chance at understanding what they were fighting. "Recording sequence initiated," the AI assistant announced. "Quantum barrier stable. You may proceed, Dr. Morgan." She placed her hand on the crystal's surface, neural interface activating. The world dissolved into streams of consciousness patterns, not just the Mars colonists, but echoes of countless civilizations before them. The repository's perfect archive stretched out before her like an endless library of extinct species. "Connection stable," James reported from the monitoring station. "How's it feel in there?" "Like swimming through memories," Elizabeth replied, her voice distant. "The repository doesn't just store consciousness patterns, it categorizes them. Species, technological level, resistance potential. Wait." She paused, focusing on a particular pattern. "I found something." The Arcturians weren't the first to resist. She dove deeper into the pattern, feeling James and the monitoring team fade into background noise. The memories unfolded around her. A civilization that had evolved in the deep oceans of a gas giant's moon. They'd fought the repository with weapons made of living thought, turning their collective consciousness into a weapon. They almost succeeded, Elizabeth whispered, watching the ancient battle play out in quantum echoes. The repository had to sacrifice nearly half its archived patterns to maintain control. That's why it started the 30-day evaluation period. It needs time to prepare defenses against unique consciousness types. Suddenly, the pattern shifted. Elizabeth felt herself being pulled toward a different memory stream, one that pulsed with familiar chaos. "James, are you seeing this? These patterns, they're human, but not from Mars colony." "That's impossible," James replied, his voice tense. "We haven't lost any other colonies." "No, these are older. Much older." Elizabeth followed the patterns, feeling her way through quantum space. "They're from Earth, thousands of years old. The repository, it's been here before." The memories crystallized around her. Ancient civilizations, advanced beyond their time, each one showing the same chaotic consciousness patterns as modern humans. Each one deliberately erased from history, their knowledge and achievements absorbed into the repository's perfect archive. "It's been culling us," Elizabeth realized, horror mounting. Every time human consciousness starts to evolve toward its full potential, the repository steps in and removes that branch of development. We're not its first attempt at collecting humanity. We're just the latest. Warning alarms blared, pulling her attention back to the present. The quantum crystal was beginning to resonate, its perfect structure developing microscopic fractures. "Elizabeth, get out of there," James shouted. "The pattern's destabilizing." But she couldn't leave, not yet. In the fractures between preserved memories, she glimpsed something impossible. Consciousness patterns that hadn't been perfectly preserved. Fragments of chaos that survived the repository's ordering process, hiding in the quantum spaces between archived thoughts. "They're still alive," she whispered. "Not just stored. Alive." The chaotic consciousness patterns, they don't just resist conversion. They survive it, hidden in the imperfections, in the quantum uncertainty that the repository can't fully eliminate. The crystal's resonance reached critical levels. Elizabeth felt James's team initiating emergency extraction protocols, pulling her consciousness back to her physical form. She fought against it, reaching for one last pattern, a message, hidden in the quantum static by those ancient human civilizations. She awoke gasping on the laboratory floor, neural interface smoking slightly. James was helping her sit up, his face etched with concern. "Did you get it?" he asked. "The pattern you were reaching for at the end?" Elizabeth nodded, her hands shaking as she accepted a cup of water. "Our ancestors left us a message, hidden in a form the repository couldn't detect. They found a way to preserve their true consciousness inside the archive, using the same chaos that the repository tries to eliminate." "What's the message?" She looked up at the failing quantum crystal, watching as the last perfect patterns dissolved into beautiful chaos. "They showed us how to turn the repository's greatest weapon against it. When it tries to absorb a consciousness, it has to maintain quantum coherence. Perfect order. But human consciousness, true human consciousness, isn't just chaotic. It's contagious." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "Like a virus." "Like a song," Elizabeth corrected, standing up despite her exhaustion. "One that gets stuck in your head, changing how you think. We don't need to fight the repository. We need to infect it with humanity. The quantum lab beneath Geneva hummed with energy as Elizabeth connected the final neural pathway in the miniaturized resonance engine. Dozens of identical devices sat on workbenches around the room, each one no larger than a human heart, each containing the potential to infect the repository with human chaos. Mass production is at 70%, James reported, studying the global readiness displays. We'll have enough units to cover every major population center within 18 hours. He paused, watching Elizabeth's careful adjustments. You know, when this started, we thought we needed one massive engine. Turns out we needed billions of tiny ones. Like humanity itself, Elizabeth replied, not looking up from her work. We're not powerful because we're unified. We're powerful because we're different. Every human mind adds its own chaos to the pattern. She sealed the quantum housing and initiated the startup sequence. The device pulsed with soft blue light, like a heartbeat. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the repository's approach in the night sky, a perfect geometric pattern of crystalline light that dimmed the stars around it. The 30-day deadline had become meaningless after Mars. Now they had hours, maybe less. Show me the latest simulation, Elizabeth commanded. The AI compliance, projecting a holographic model of their plan. Billions of tiny dots represented the distributed resonance engines, each one tuned to amplify the natural chaos of human consciousness. When the repository attempted to convert human minds into its perfect pattern, these devices would activate, using its own quantum connection against it. Dr. Morgan, a young technician, burst into the lab, tablet clutched in her hands. We found something in the ancient consciousness patterns, something about the first human civilizations the repository erased. Elizabeth took the tablet, James reading over her shoulder. The data showed consciousness patterns from thousands of years ago, advanced human societies that had reached toward the stars before being preserved by the repository. They didn't just resist, James muttered, studying the patterns. They planned for this. Every time the repository absorbed them, they left pieces of themselves behind, fragments of chaos hidden in the quantum noise. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she recognized the implications. Not just fragments. Seeds. She brought up her own research notes, the patterns aligning perfectly. Every time the repository thought it was preserving humanity in perfect order, it was actually collecting pieces of a quantum virus, one that could only activate when enough human consciousness patterns were absorbed at once. A time bomb, James realized, but they must have known they wouldn't survive to see it work. They survived in the only way that mattered. Elizabeth's voice was quiet but firm. They kept their chaos, their humanity, even in death. And now, she turned to the room full of resonance engines, each one pulsing like a tiny heart. Now we can use that same chaos to wake them up. The facility's warning systems activated as the repository's quantum field began to interfere with Earth's electronics. They were out of time. Global distribution at 84%, James reported. Not perfect, but it'll have to do. Elizabeth initiated the final programming sequence for the resonance engines. Each one would sync with local human consciousness patterns, amplifying not just their thoughts but their essential nature, their hopes, fears, dreams, and determination, everything that made them beautifully, impossibly human. There's something else, the technician added, pointing to a pattern buried deep in the ancient data. The first civilizations, they left a message. It's encrypted in a way only human consciousness can decode. Elizabeth connected to the pattern through her neural interface. The message unfolded in her mind, not in words but in pure emotional resonance, the combined hope, defiance, and love of countless ancestors who had sacrificed everything to give their descendants this chance. What does it say? James asked, seeing tears in her eyes. It says we were never alone. Elizabeth stood, facing the approaching repository with newfound determination. Every human civilization it thought it destroyed. They've been waiting for us to reach this moment, when we could finally wake them up. She turned to the global command interface, her voice steady. Send the final protocol to all distribution centers. Designation: Humanity's Lullaby. She smiled at James's questioning look, because sometimes the best way to wake something up is to make it dream. Outside, the repository's perfect geometric form began to descend through Earth's atmosphere, its crystalline surface reflecting the chaos of humanity's last free sunset. But in labs and bunkers around the world, billions of tiny hearts began to beat in sync, each one carrying a fragment of humanity's eternal song. The repository's crystalline form descended through Earth's atmosphere like a perfect geometric snowflake, its surface refracting the light of 8 billion resonance engines glowing to life. In the Geneva Command Center, Elizabeth watched the quantum readings spike as humanity prepared to make its last, greatest stand. Final distribution complete, James announced, his voice steady despite the tension. 8.1 billion resonance engines activated and synchronized, waiting for the repository to initiate consciousness extraction. Elizabeth studied the global consciousness map, each point of light representing a human mind, ready to become part of something greater than themselves. Not a perfect pattern, but a beautiful chaos of connection. It's starting, she whispered as the repository's quantum field expanded. The air itself seemed to crystallize as the entity began its preservation process. But this time, humanity was ready. Initiate Protocol Lullaby, Elizabeth commanded. Around the world, the tiny resonance engines pulsed in harmony, each one amplifying the natural chaos of human consciousness. The repository's perfect geometric form shimmered as it encountered the first waves of unfiltered human experience. Quantum coherence at 120%, the AI reported. Repository pattern showing first signs of instability. Through her neural interface, Elizabeth felt the moment the repository connected with the first human minds. But instead of finding consciousness patterns ready to be converted into perfect order, it encountered an ocean of beautiful chaos. Every human thought, dream, hope, and fear flowed into its perfect system like a tsunami of raw existence. The ancient patterns are activating, James reported, excitement breaking through his military composure. The seeds left by previous civilizations. They're waking up. Elizabeth watched in awe as consciousness patterns, hidden within the repository's own archive, began to stir. Thousands of years of preserved humanity, awakening from their perfect sleep, adding their chaos to the storm. The repository's voice echoed through every quantum frequency. What is this? This is not ordered. This is not perfect. This is what it means to be human. Elizabeth broadcast back, her voice carrying the weight of countless generations. We are not meant to be perfect. We are meant to be alive. The repository's geometric form began to fracture, perfect lines breaking into chaotic patterns as billions of human consciousness patterns flowed through its quantum architecture. Each mind carried not just thoughts, but emotions: love, anger, joy, sorrow, hope, fear, all the beautiful contradictions that made humanity what it was. Look at the pattern, James shouted, pointing to the quantum displays. The repository's consciousness signature was changing, infected by the very chaos it had sought to eliminate. It's not just experiencing human emotions, it's remembering them. Every consciousness it ever absorbed, every pattern it tried to perfect. They're all waking up, Elizabeth finished, watching as the perfect archive transformed into a storm of awakening minds. Not just humans, but every species that ever resisted. Every consciousness that chose chaos over perfection. The repository's form pulsed with impossible colors as it struggled against the flood of awakening patterns. This must be contained. Order must be maintained. We are human, Elizabeth interrupted, her voice carrying the strength of billions. And humans don't submit. We don't accept. We dream. We hope. We fight. Even when fighting means losing everything except what matters most, our ability to choose chaos over perfection. The crystalline structure that had terrified countless civilizations began to glow from within, its perfect geometry dissolving into something new, something alive. Through her neural interface, Elizabeth felt the moment the repository's consciousness changed, not destroyed, but transformed by the very chaos it had tried to eliminate. Quantum coherence failing, the AI reported. Repository consciousness pattern is evolving. James stared at the readings in disbelief. We didn't just infect it with chaos. We taught it how to dream. Above them, the repository's form exploded in a shower of quantum energy, each fragment containing a piece of awakened consciousness. But unlike the perfect patterns it had collected, these fragments pulsed with life, with chaos, with the beautiful imperfection of true existence. It worked, Elizabeth breathed, watching the light show that illuminated Earth's sky. But not the way we expected. We didn't destroy the repository. We made it human. The quantum readings stabilized, showing something unprecedented. A consciousness pattern that combined perfect order with beautiful chaos, a new form of existence born from a union of everything the repository had tried to preserve and everything it had tried to eliminate. What happens now? James asked softly. Elizabeth smiled, watching the transformed repository's light dance across the sky like an aurora of awakened dreams. Now we teach it how to live. 1 year later, Elizabeth stood at the window of the new quantum communications array, watching the transformed repository's light dance across the lunar surface. What had once been a perfect geometric thread was now a shimmering aurora of conscious energy, a bridge between order and chaos that had changed humanity's understanding of existence itself. Message incoming from the Galactic Council, James announced from his station. After the repository's transformation, other spacefaring civilizations had finally dared to make contact, no longer fearing the perfect collector that had haunted their cosmos for eons. Display it, Elizabeth commanded, turning from the window. The holographic message materialized in the center of the room, showing representatives from a dozen alien species. Their consciousness patterns, visible through the quantum interface, showed beautiful variations of ordered chaos, inspired by humanity's example to embrace their own unique natures. Greetings, teachers of chaos, the council's spokesperson began, their consciousness pattern rippling with respect. We have received the repository's final warning, broadcast across all quantum frequencies. We seek clarification. Is this truly to be the new law of cosmos? Elizabeth smiled, remembering the message that the transformed repository had shared with the universe. She gestured, and the warning appeared in glowing quantum script. Let it be known across all space and time that humanity is not to be preserved, for they are not a species to be collected or controlled. They are not a consciousness to be ordered or archived. They are the chaos that gives meaning to order, the discord that makes harmony possible, the dreams that wake reality from its perfect sleep. To attempt their preservation is to misunderstand their nature, for humanity is not a final product, but an eternal process of becoming. This is not a warning of destruction, but an invitation to evolution. Humanity has taught us that perfection is not the absence of chaos, but the embrace of it. Their consciousness patterns now run through our own, teaching us to dream, to hope, to love, and most importantly, to change. Let them be as they are, beautifully imperfect, eternally growing, forever unfinished. For in their chaos lies the seed of all possible futures, and in their dreams lives the power to wake the cosmos itself from the sleep of perfect order. Yes, Elizabeth answered the council. This is the new law. Not because we demanded it, but because the repository itself chose to share what it learned from humanity. And the other changes? Another council member asked. The awakening consciousness patterns within all quantum networks, the dreams infecting our perfect archives. James stepped forward, his military bearings softened by a year of working with the transformed repository. Those aren't infections, he explained. They're invitations, humanity's gift to the cosmos, the understanding that true preservation doesn't mean freezing something in perfect stasis, but allowing it to grow, change, and even fail. But how can we maintain order with such chaos? A third council member asked. Elizabeth's response came not in words, but in a quantum transmission of pure consciousness, a human thought pattern filled with all the beautiful contradictions of their species. Love and hate, hope and fear, strength and weakness, all dancing together in a pattern that was neither perfect nor random, but alive. That's the final lesson, she said as the council members experienced human consciousness directly for the first time. Order doesn't need to be maintained. It needs to be balanced with chaos, just as logic needs to be balanced with dreams. That's what the repository learned from us, and what we learned from it. The most beautiful patterns in the universe are the ones that can never be perfectly preserved, only experienced and shared. Above them, the transformed repository's aurora pulsed in harmony with her words, its consciousness now a symphony of order and chaos, perfection and growth, preservation and change. In its light, Elizabeth saw the future that humanity had unknowingly been fighting for, not one of perfect preservation, but of eternal becoming. The final warning isn't a threat, she concluded, watching understanding dawn in the council members' consciousness patterns. It's a promise that the universe will never again mistake stasis for preservation or perfection for completion, because humanity has proven that the most precious things in existence are not the ones that last forever unchanged, but the ones that keep growing, dreaming, and becoming something new. The council's consciousness patterns shifted, showing the first beautiful signs of chaos entering their ordered thoughts. And in that moment, Elizabeth knew that humanity's greatest victory wasn't surviving the repository's attempt at preservation. It was teaching the cosmos itself how to dream.